Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Aviation Nerd Podcast. Today, we have another very special guest. He flew F-15s in the Montana Air National Guard, as well as flying for a major U.S. airline. His name is John McFarlin, callsign Slab, so please help me welcome him to the podcast. All right, so we'll just get started then. Clearly, you are a pilot, so how'd you get into aviation?
For me, it was basically just a desire to want to serve the military. So, as a kid growing up, I was around airplanes as a really young age. My dad was into general aviation, but I just never really sparked the interest. You hear about all these people, maybe similar to you, who got the bug at a really young age and all they want to do is fly airplanes their entire life. For me, I had no idea of flying airplanes until I got in college. And then in college, 9/11 happened. So that sort of, for whatever reason, sparked an interest to want to join and serve. And I just wanted to fly fighters. That's all I wanted to do. I have no idea like when that idea came to me. I just knew it was like right around 9/11. And from that point on, it was like this obsession that all I wanted to do was fly fighters. So I got bit by the bug pretty hard, and everything was one track mind of how do I go make this dream a reality. For me, I thought the best way of flying fighters was to go to the Navy. Just statistically, for their fleet size, they had more fighters than other types of airplanes. So I started looking into what that would entail, and I applied for a program my sophomore year of college that basically, it would pay for college until you graduated and then guarantee you a pilot training slot. And so I thought that was the best path to take. I applied for it and got an NFO slot, so Naval Flight Officer slot, not a pilot slot. I was like, no way. Let me reapply. And the recruiter I was talking to was like, well, if you want to reapply, you should go with some flight time. That will help you sort of increase your competitiveness in your packet. So I went to a local flight school, got my private pilot certificate, and just by pure dumb luck, my flight instructor that got assigned to me was applying to this thing that I had never heard of before called the Air National Guard. And so the Air National Guard being a reserve component of the Air Force, the unique part about that is you are now applying directly to a squadron that flies a certain type of airplane, just like a regular job. And if you're selected, you're going to go to pilot training, the same pilot training that all active duty Air Force pilots go to, whether you go to the academy, ROTC, or anything else. And you know that you are going to go back to that squadron at the end of your pilot training. And the only way you can go back to that squadron is if you fly their same airplane. And so if you get hired by an F-22 squadron, you're going to go fly the F-22. If you're going to be hired by a C-130 squadron, you're going to fly a C-130. And so when he told me about this, I thought it was way too good to be true. No chance that that is how the military works. I thought I knew everything about it. I thought the Navy was the best path to take to get the fighters. And he just gave me this reality of, well, no, you can go apply directly to fighter units and potentially get in that way. And so that changed my whole perspective. I thought that was amazing once I realized that was true. And so I transferred schools to the University of North Dakota. So they have a big civilian aviation program. So I went all in on just learning everything civilian aviation, make myself competitive. Got like CFI, all those standard like FAA ratings, and then started applying to guard units. From there, I was fortunate enough to get picked up by an F-15 unit in Montana. Went to pilot training at Shepherd Air Force Base just outside of Dallas. Went to F-15 trained up at Klamath Falls, Oregon. Went back to Montana. Was only there for about a year, and then they ended up switching airplanes to C-130s. And when they switched to C-130s, they gave me the green light to move to a different squadron to continue to fly fighters. And so then I moved down to my home state of Florida. I was in the Florida Air National Guard flying F-15s for about 15 years and went to the airlines at some point in there too. But anyway, that's sort of a longer answer than you maybe wanted, but it all started 9/11 and then went all this different crazy paths to find the guard and everything went all in from there.
Yeah, I mean, you just breezed through like a couple of my questions here, but yeah, we can elaborate a little bit on some of them. So, what was the process? You mentioned kind of rushing units. What was that process like? And yeah, just what kind of how is it going to different units and maybe not getting what you wanted to fly? So, yeah.
Yeah, so the way that the application process is a little bit different. So for context, if you wanted to fly active duty Air Force, you would have one of three paths primarily. So you're going to go to the Air Force Academy. So you need to know that that's what you want to do, like out of high school, and go through that whole application process, which is a whole other animal. You can go to college, do the ROTC program, and then after you graduate, get commissioned into the Air Force, maybe go to pilot training and do that path, or you can go to OTS or they call it total force officer training now. but essentially you get picked up for an officer slot after college to go to pilot training. If you go to pilot training that way, you know that you're going to go to pilot training, but you have no idea what you're going to fly. It's all the needs of the Air Force. You get some say in it based on how well you do throughout pilot training, but you might be the number one guy in your class, but they need a bunch of RPA pilots or heavy pilots, and that's just the path you're going to go, even if your dream was always to fly fighters or vice versa. So there's all sorts of stories of people that don't necessarily go down the same path that they originally dreamt for themselves. And what the guard does is gives you a lot more control. And so that part of it's really cool. But the challenging part about it is you're applying to each of these squadrons individually. So throughout the Guard and Reserve, there's about 165 different flying squadrons. And that's everything from C-130s, C-5s, C-17s, KC-135s, KC-46s, and then every fighter you can think of in there. So it's all the same aircraft that the active duty Air Force flies for the most part. But now you're applying to each of these squadrons differently. So the way that that process worked back then, it really hasn't changed a ton, is you have to go to each of those individual squadrons to figure out, hey, where are they posting their job applications? Are they posting on Facebook? You have to go through the recruiter. Are the pilots handling it through their own website or whatever the case is? And so there might be 165 different ways to apply and find this information and talk to somebody. So it's super time consuming, super painful. It's one of the reasons that we started the company that we did, to sort of consolidate a lot of information to make that easier. But for me, it was make a list of every fighter unit that was out there, because all I want to do is fly fighters. I don't care where you take me. You can take me to Siberia. I would go there and fly fighters if that was an option. And so I made a list of all the fighter units. There are about 40 or so in the Guard and Reserve. Figure out when they're accepting applications, do everything I can, obviously, to make my application as strong as possible. And then you just start shotgunning applications out to all these places. Some of them you don't hear anything back from. Some of them you get invited to an interview. You go to the interview, you might not get selected because there's other highly qualified people there too. And a couple I was fortunate enough to get selected for. And so it's just sort of a grind of over a couple years of, applying, being rejected, apply again, maybe get selected. And you just keep on going at it until you finally get your chance.
Yeah, so how many did you get accepted to, and why did you said, I believe you said you ended up choosing the Montana Guard. How did you end up picking that?
Well, to be clear, I didn't choose Montana. Montana chose
Okay.
me. I was willing to go wherever. They were just nice enough to give me an opportunity. Before I even graduated college, because I was in North Dakota at the time with their flight program, I applied to all the surrounding units around there as well, and got picked up at the South Dakota Air National Guard with flew F-16s. And so I thought I like nailed it. Hey, I got this pilot slot waiting for me before I even graduate college, which was pretty early in this process of getting selected. And as I'm waiting for pilot training, roughly like 6 months or so after I get selected, I get a call from your squadron commander. I think he's calling me to tell me, hey, congratulations, we got your pilot training slot. Here's, when you're going to leave, when you're going to ship off and go to officer training and get the process started. And instead, he calls me to tell me that I've been medically disqualified for putting in my medical records that I dislocated my shoulder playing baseball in college. Had no idea it's medically disqualifying, but unless it's surgically fixed, then for whatever reason, I think it's disqualifying. So it totally blindsided me. Didn't know that was going to be a factor at all. And so it basically set me back like, hey, sorry, like, go get surgery, see if you can get a waiver and you can start the whole process over again. So that's what I had to do. Go get surgery, start the waiver process through the Air Force. But then at the end of it, like at that point, you lost your slot with that unit. And so now you're just reapplying to every other unit that's out there. And so there were several places that I applied to. Like I said, didn't hear anything back. A few places I applied to, went to interviews and just wasn't selected as the primary candidate. And then was fortunate enough to get picked up in Montana. Montana was just, again, just shows you that you got to sort of apply to as many places as you can and put those opportunities out there. Because I didn't think I stood a chance in hell in getting selected there. Didn't have any connections to Montana, didn't know anyone there or anything like that. It was just sort of one of those shots in the dark, like let's give it a chance. And on that particular hiring board, with those people reviewing applications and the other candidates I was going against, just sort of worked out well. So I was very fortunate to get the opportunity, and always going to be grateful for those guys to get my foot in the door.
Yeah, nice. And what do you think they were really looking for in you? What do you think? I mean, you said you didn't have any connections at that time to Montana, but what do you think they saw and you were like, yeah, that's the guy we want?
You'd have to talk to them. There's actually sort of some controversy around that from what I found out afterwards. So because I didn't think I had any chance at all for getting hired. And again, this is sort of a grind. When you're in the process of applying to all these places, you feel like you're setting the same applications, all these different units. And like I said, you get different results for each of them. So it's hard to know like what's working, what's not. For this particular unit, because I didn't think I had a chance, like less chance there than any other unit, because again, just geographically, I didn't have any connections or anything like that. Um, they asked for a headshot picture. And typically I would send in like a very professional looking headshot, as most applicants would. In this particular case, I was like, screw it, let's take a chance. And I sent him a picture of me dressed up as Ron Burgundy from Anchorman at a college party and just tried to like get their attention kind of thing. And I had all my civilian ratings, I had good GPAs. Like there's a lot of things in the application that you still are just sort of prerequisites to being competitive. But this was just sort of a way of trying to stand out from the crowd. And it turns out that the squadron commander at the time who reviewed this basically took my application and immediately threw it in the trash because he's like, dude, this is totally unprofessional. Like, absolutely not. This is not the kind of person we want. But fortunate to me, and this is all happening, behind the scenes. I had no idea. I found this out afterwards that a few of the young guys that were on that hiring board were sort of nice enough to pull it out of the trash and say, hey, let's just give him a chance, bring him in here for an interview. Let's see what he has to say. Like, this is sort of funny, going on a limb, blah, blah, blah. And they gave me a chance to at least come interview. And then the interview obviously went well and was able to get picked up. But as far as what they were looking for, I think it's probably pretty similar to what most squadrons are looking for. Certainly, in my experience, sitting on hiring boards now on the other side of the application process, is you're looking for people that have shown a track record of success. So we want to see that you have a good GPA. We want to see that you have a good work ethic. We want to see that you've done well in whatever it is that you've set your mind to. You've held leadership positions. Athletics is a good thing because it shows that you've had the fortitude to work together in a team with a common goal, to go through some sort of hard times, to fail and bounce back, which are all important traits for flying. And then obviously, if you have some sort of flying skills and background, that helps too. You don't need to be like an airline pilot or anything like that, but if you at least have your private pilot certificate, that shows that you've at least gone through those initial phases of understanding what aviation is about. You have some aptitude for it, and certainly have the desire to want to do more of it. And so I think those are sort of the basics. And then once you get your foot in the door for a chance to an interview, then you're competing with, 10 or 15 other candidates for maybe one slot. And the whole idea there is they're just trying to figure out who's going to fit into their culture the best. Because in the Guard, sort of again, unique compared to active duty, is you might have someone there for the next 20 years. So if we hire you into our squadron, we want to find someone that's going to put down roots, that's going to like raise their family there, that someone that we're going to deploy with multiple times, and someone that you're going to get along with really, really well in and outside the squadron out there. So they're just looking to figure out who jives the best because at that point, everyone has good qualifications and whatnot. And then you sort of roll the bones, you pick somebody, they go off the training, and then you don't see them again for another 2 years until they get back. And so it's sort of this weird process where a 30-minute interview with somebody may determine the next 20 years of your life.
Yeah. So from what I understand, and like you kind of mentioned, the process of you rushing units did take a couple years. So I'm curious, what did you do in the time in between when you're just kind of throwing in applications? So yeah, what did you kind of do to make money and stay occupied?
Yeah, so one of the benefits of going to a program like University of North Dakota and getting the aviation degree is when I graduated from that program, I had my CFI, CFII ratings. And so as my, first job out of college, I was a flight instructor at a local flight school in Denver. And so it worked out great in the sense that I was building flight time, which I think looks good on an application too, because you can make the argument that, hey, not only do I have a extensive civilian aviation background that's going to help out going through pilot training and stuff in the military, but you also gain a perspective as being an instructor of what that's like teaching somebody, which is going to help you as a student when you're going through UPT and that kind of stuff on the Air Force side as well. So I was building flight time, building my own experience, and I think that helped make me a little bit more competitive as well throughout the circuit.
Yeah, going through flight school, I mean, because you mentioned that you had, when you go through flight school as an Air National Guard pilot, that you kind of already know what you're going to fly. So when you were selected, you already knew that after flight school, you were probably going to go fly the F-15. So do you think that made flight school less stressful, or do you think it actually made it more stressful that if you don't do well in flight training, that you're kind of letting the unit down? Or yeah.
Um, I think it's certainly less stressful than if I was on the active duty side and I felt like I had this weight on my shoulders of like, oh man, I screwed that up. That may have cost me my fighter slot or something like that, right? So like I think there's a sense of calmness going through pilot training, knowing that, hey, all I need to do is just not screw this up, essentially. Because you can still wash out. There's a lot of people that have been selected for fighters that don't end up going fighters because they don't do well enough. You still have to meet a certain bar to get through pilot training, to get your fighter slot if that's what you're selected for, to move on. So nothing's guaranteed, but this opportunity is basically sitting in your lap. It's yours to lose at that point. And so the stress that maybe an active duty person might have of trying to figure out like what does the Air Force need? What's my timing? Do I have good timing, bad timing for whatever kind of drops are coming down as far as what type of airplanes are available? I think that's an added stress that I fortunately did not have to go with or go through. But at the same time, like even if you take that stress out of it, it's always been my personality, and typically it's the personality of the people that tend to get hired in these positions that you just always want to represent well, right? Like there's a common term that they use in probably all military, certainly Air Force, called a limfac or a limiting factor, sort of like the weak link in the chain. You never want to be the dude that's perceived as like the weak link, right? Like even if you're flying T6s in the early phases of pilot training, you always want to be toward the top. Even if you know that that grade doesn't really mean much for you as far as what you're going to do with your career, there's just a competitiveness that we're looking for when we hire people that we want them to want to be the best. Not like stab your buddies in the back to be the best, but like just the drive to want to sort of push yourself to always sort of achieve as much as you can as quickly as you can.
Yeah, so as I was just saying, you did mention that you had some civilian flight time prior to going through military flight school, and on the show, I've had people who have gone into the military with zero flying experience, and I've had people who have come in with like hundreds of hours of flight experience. Um, and I always have to ask, I've gotten many different answers. Some people saying that it helps a lot in flight training, some people saying that they actually don't think it helps. Do you think your civilian flight time helped you succeed more in flight training in the military, or do you think it harmed you or maybe didn't help at all?
No, I think it helped a lot. And basically, like if we're talking about like just basic airmanship, learn how to like talk on the radio while flying an airplane, and instrument skills, like those are sort of like the fundamentals that through some civilian aviation experience translate really well to the military. Like beyond that, at that point, there's probably not a huge gain, right? Like I'm an airline pilot now as well. Me flying airlines from point A to point B on autopilot most of the time and that kind of stuff. Like there's not a whole lot of direct translation from that lifestyle to going and flying T6s and T38s and F-15s in the military. But learning the fundamentals of like, hey, flying an ILS and a Cessna 172 is the exact same as flying an ILS and an F-15. It's just faster, right? And so like the fundamentals that you learn translate well, and that just means that hey, those are less brain bites you need to understand the fundamentals because you already know those. Now you can focus on a little bit more of the sort of minutia to just sort of elevate your learning a lot more. Now, once you start getting to things that you never do in the civilian world, at least for me, like formation flying was brand new to me. The aerobatic stuff was brand new to me. And so those are things where, again, some airmanship from civilian experience helps out, but there's not really direct translation from one to the other. So you're sort of learning that for the first time, along with everyone else in the class.
Totally. So, once you went on to join the Guard, of course, you flew the F-15. And the Air National Guard, for anybody who doesn't know, is more for people who have already served maybe 10, 15 years in the active duty Air Force, and then they want to still kind of serve, but also have another job. Um, so I guess maybe you can tell me, but are lieutenants and younger people in the military less common in the Air National Guard? And kind of what is the role like for being a younger lieutenant with maybe some people who are older, who've already kind of served in active duty? What's that kind of like?
Sure. So typically there are going to be fewer lieutenants or young people. It tends to be very top heavy because, like you said, you're going to get a lot of active duty pilots that are coming off of their 10-year military commitment. So in the Air Force, you have a 10-year commitment after you earn your wings. So really, you're about 12 years or so into your Air Force career. And once those people are eligible to get out, they can either stay active duty, they can get out altogether, or a lot of them will decide to transfer to the Guard or Reserve and have the option of doing it part-time or full-time or any combination of the two. And so you tend to get people that are really at that mid-year point, just sort of starting off to your point that you were saying. And so to combat that and to make it so you don't have a squadron that's all majors and lieutenant colonels and like all top heavy spots, then they'll allow you to hire maybe one or two candidates a year to go to UPT. And so those are called guard babies. That's what I am. Guard baby just means like you started in the guard. You were born in the guard, you lived in the guard the entire time. Same thing on the Air Force Reserve as well. And so you might hire one or two of those a year. In a fighter squadron, typically that's one a year. And so you might get anywhere from like 300 plus applications. You might have one slot. That person gets hired. And then when they get hired, they just go away for 2 years. They're going to go to officer training, UPT. They got to go to, in my case, F-15B course. And you don't see them again for 2 years. They may wash out. They may make it through, whatever the case is. So you're sort of like putting an investment into this unknown quantity, hoping that they come back to your squadron in 2 years. And then you start accumulating a couple young guys. And so you maybe have one young guy for every year. And when I say year, I mean like, hey, it's 2025. This is the person that we hire in 2025. Then we have one in 2026 and so on and so forth. And so like every year you sort of have one young guy or one lieutenant that represents the year that they were hired. And you don't hire anyone, you don't hire someone every year. And so sometimes you skip a year and blah, blah, blah. And so really when you look at it, you maybe have um, I don't know, one or two lieutenants, a few captains, and then it's really, really top heavy from there in a typical guard fighter squadron. Anyway, when I was first hired, I had the unique privilege of being the only lieutenant, and everyone else was majors, lieutenant colonels. There wasn't even another captain in the squadron. So that means that you get a lot of individual attention as being the one young guy in the squadron. And that basically, like what that role means to you is that you're responsible for whatever they tell you to do. So your main responsibility is become lethal in whatever airplane you're going to fly, understand all the tactics, get in the books. Like there's just so much to learn. And so you could always spend time learning and just understanding more and more tactics and more about the airplane, that kind of stuff. But outside of the learning stuff, you're responsible for keeping the squadron clean to help out with morale events. So anytime people are looking for snacks or looking for t-shirts or patches or that kind of stuff, if there's an air show going on, you're probably going to be the person that goes and stands in front of the airplane handing out gear to people walking by the air show. If there's any sort of other public event in the city, you're probably the person that's being tapped with that. And so you're doing a lot of the grunt work, I guess, but it's all sort of an important ingredient to keep the squadron sort of this vibrant community that people want to be a part of. Because the old guys are sort of, you know, get a little rough around the edges the older you get, and get a little crusty. And so the young guys are where you need to sort of inject that energy, and they're the ones that are super excited to be there and that kind of stuff. And so it's an important element to keep the squadron healthy.
Yeah, that sounds like you got a good balance. So I got to ask, you actually are not only the first Air Force pilot I've had on the show, because I've had a lot of Navy F-18 pilots. You're also the first F-15 pilot. And the F-15 is probably commonly known as being one of the faster fighter jets in the U.S. So I've got to ask, if you can say, what is the fastest you've gone in the F-15?
Uh, the exact speed, it probably been close to Mach 2 on there, with the normal configuration of the Eagle with external fuel tanks, missiles and stuff like that hanging out the side. It's pretty hard to go much faster than that unless you're going downhill. If you drop the tanks, like if you were in like a real actual like combat situation where you're looking to shoot somebody, you could drop those tanks and that would immediately not only like decrease your weight depending on how much gas is in the tanks, but make you substantially more aerodynamic to be able to get up to that speed pretty quickly. But I would say on a typical day, you're looking at, anywhere from Mach 1 to Mach 1.3, 1.4 for a normal train event with that configuration. And then if you really want to go fast, you can, like I said, have a different configuration for the airplane, which would allow you to get over 1.5 pretty easily.
Yeah. And I imagine, we'll talk a little bit later about maybe what some alert intercept missions might look like, but I imagine that you're probably going pretty quick on those. Um, so yeah. But I gotta ask, your call sign, Slap. I gotta ask the call sign story. For every pilot I have on, have to ask that story. But also the way I've seen the way you write it in the emails, it's in all caps. I gotta ask, is it an acronym? And if so, if you're willing to share, what does it stand for?
Sure. So, SLAP is an acronym. It's very common if you see any fighter pilot call signs that are all capital, it's because there's a story that goes along with each letter, so to speak. And so, for my call sign, there's usually like a PC version, a not so PC version. The PC version of it essentially is That again, like I said, my first squadron I was a part of was in Montana, and so the elevation of the airport in Montana at the airport that I was flying out of was like 3 or 4 thousand feet. So relatively high up above sea level. And so I'm used to seeing we have old analog altimeters and gauges, and the Eagle, it's a pretty old airplane. And so I'm used to sort of seeing that as my normal altitude that you would see on the altimeter when you're on the ground. And as a young lieutenant, I got a chance to go fly with Jacksonville at the time. So this is before I was named, and go down to Jacksonville to do some training down there. And so I'm going back to Florida. They at the time had a different sort of suite of F-15. So same basic airframe, but different avionics upgrade. They had some other things that were just sort of different about their airplanes that we didn't have in Montana. Montana was just converting from F-16s to F-15s. So they had like older F-15s, and that's saying a lot for F-15s because they're all pretty old. But they just didn't have all the bells and whistles that Jacksonville had at the time. And so when you show up as a brand new guy to like you're a guest at a squadron, again, going back to the limfac thing, you just don't want to screw anything up. You don't want to put a bullseye in your back that you screwed up a procedure or you weren't where you need to be on the radios and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm getting the books, trying to understand all their local procedures for getting in and out of the airport so don't screw that up. I'm trying to also understand some of these different like avionics upgrades and stuff that I haven't seen yet or read about. And so it's finally my time to go do my first actual like training mission there. I'm still very inexperienced. And so I get to the airplane, we start up. And from start up until your first check-in. So typically what happens is like the flight lead will say whatever your call sign is at that squadron. Typically your call sign would be Fang 1. So if you're a two ship, it might be Fang 1, 2. If you're a four ship, Fang 1, 2, 3, 4. And so when he's ready to check in, he'll say Fang check. And it's just 2, 3, 4 down the line. And you saying your number, whatever position you are in that formation, is an indication that you're ready to go. And so as a young guy, what you want to do is make sure that you are in fact ready to go. So you're not holding up the group. And so here I am starting up. You got about 15 minutes until you check in. That gives you time to get all your systems set up, everything like that. And I'm seeing some weird electrical stuff going on in my cockpit. I don't know what the hell is going on. There's some things I don't understand. This must be part of this new software upgrade. I have no idea what's going on, but I also don't want to speak up on the radio because as soon as you speak up on the radio, everybody hears it. And you don't want to identify yourself as not knowing what the heck's going on with this thing. And so I'm trying to figure it out. And I know that like time is clicking down. I got to check in here soon, and I do not want to miss this check in. And so as it gets closer and closer to the check in, finally I look over and see that my altimeter is reading 99,900. And here we are at sea level. And I'm like, well, all right, I don't know what's going on with the electrical stuff here, but I definitely know that I cannot fly with an altimeter that's clearly broken because it's 99,900 feet off of sea level. And so I immediately call into maintenance and tell them that my altimeter is broken instead of any of the avionics stuff that I don't quite understand. I'm using this as my excuse to maybe get to a spare jet and get out of here. And immediately my flight lead like gets on the radio and was like, "Hey, confirm you put in the altimeter setting, just like any barometric pressure change at any airport." And of course, me being such a smart civilian CFI, I think in my head, like I just immediately respond back, affirmative, thinking like, dude, what is going to change from me putting like, 2.9 or 8.2 versus 2.9 or 6.2 or whatever the altimeter was that day. I'm like, it might change at 100 feet. It's not going to change much. I'm 99,900 feet off my altitude. Changing altimeter isn't going to change much. And so I think about it for a little bit after I already said affirmative on the radio, and I go and I actually spin the altimeter in the way it's supposed to on the altimeter. And instead of the altimeter rolling back 99,900 feet, it just rolled up 100 feet to zero because we're at sea level. And so I basically made a fool of myself in my very first radio call in Florida of thinking I knew better than I did. And so to make sure that I never forget what the sea level pressure is, I was named SLAP for sea level altimeter pressure. So I will never forget that I need to put my altimeter in my barometric pressure in my altimeter before I start flying.
That's a pretty good. That's a pretty good call sign story. So yeah, of course you're an National Guard pilot. And I think that probably, I mean, we can talk about maybe some other types of missions that Air National Guard pilots fly, but from what I understand, a typical mission is maybe an alert mission if there's TFI or something where people aren't allowed to fly in into a certain airspace, and then it's your guys' job to go in and stop them from being in that airspace. In fact, I actually remember in my area where I live, there was someone violated some airspace a couple years ago, and some F-15s ended up having to scramble to intercept. And I remember that was in the news. And I just got to ask, what were some of your alert missions like, and what was kind of a typical day as an Air National Guard pilot?
Sure. Well, first off, you're right that Air National Guard has the mission of the alert mission and stuff like that, but I wouldn't say that's our primary mission. That's certainly our primary mission as far as like real world stuff at home. But as far as like a daily training mission is training for whatever war we might get called in for. So we're still a reserve component of the Air Force. I've been deployed multiple times downrange in the Middle East. Like you are basically, available to go help out in any war that's out there. And typically a guard unit will get called in about every 2 years to get deployed someplace around the world, just like the active duty Air Force. And so most of your time is spent training for a China scenario or Russia scenario or Iran scenario or whatever the adversary du jour is out there. But of course, the alert part is our homeland mission. That's really important as well. So typically, 90% of your time is focused on training for something overseas. And then the real world mission that you'll have to sort of like step away from the training and go do the real world stuff is going and setting an alert. For us in Florida, our alert site was down in South Florida. So it's detached from our actual training base in Jacksonville. So you'd have to fly down to Miami, take a car down to Homestead. There's a little compound that you go sit in on there for alert. And then when you're there, you're stuck there for anywhere from 3 to 7 days for us. You're just sort of stuck in this facility and it's sort of like a white collar prison. You're just working out, watching movies, getting caught up with email, like doing that kind of stuff, and you're just waiting for a horn to go off. And then I always describe it as sort of like a firehouse for fighter pilots. And so you're there with some maintenance personnel to make sure the jets are good to go, and you're basically just killing time and you're waiting for a horn to go off. And at any point, whether it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 o'clock in the morning, if the horn goes off, you're running to the jet and getting airborne as quickly as you can, and you have no idea what you're taking off into. So could be a drug runner, could be a derelict object, or sort of like what you were talking about. I think in Seattle, someone hijacking, not hijacking, but basically stealing an airplane from an airport and then going on a joyride all around, and then they get intercepted by fighters because they don't know what that person's intention is with that airplane. It could be a hijacked airliner, could be, for us in South Florida, anything nefarious going on down in Cuba or any place like that. And so you always got to be ready. You don't know where you're taking off into, that kind of stuff. Fortunately, since 9/11, they've invested so much infrastructure into the air traffic system and stuff. They've got a pretty good idea of who people are and where they are and all that kind of stuff. And so you don't actually get too many horns anymore. Post 9/11, they were getting scrambled all the time. Other places like DC, they get scrambled a fair amount, but most places you're not getting called in too much. The times recently where we were getting called in, more often is in Trump's first term, and he would go down to Mar-a-Lago or something like that for the weekend, and someone would violate a TFR, and then all of a sudden they'd scramble jets that we would have to go like try to intercept a Cessna that didn't know that they were violating TFR and trying to fly them out of there and stuff like that. And so there's always a little bit of something going on. A couple interesting ones that have happened, not necessarily ones that I've been on, but just sort of, stories that you hear about our guys in the squadron doing stuff, or things like having a horn go off in the middle of the night. And when you take off and now you're launching, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning. You have no idea where you're flying to. In this particular case, it was a TFR violator for Trump. And they basically they have to approve you to go supersonic, because if you're doing supersonic over land, you're going to create a big sonic boom. And they basically went supersonic right over Miami at night and set off all these car alarms, and like people calling 911 saying that there's an explosion and all this other kind of stuff. And so that happens every once in a while, where you basically topple 911 lines because you're having sonic booms go ripping through South Florida. So you try to avoid that if you can, unless it's like a really emergency to get someplace really fast. There's been a couple instances where people have gone hypoxic and basically passed out in the airplane. And the airplane's on autopilot, sort of. Who's the golfer? Payne Stewart. That happened many, many years ago, probably before you were even born, where he ended up crashing into the Midwest. But in this particular case, there was a family that had an airplane flying up high, passed out, and now the airplane's just on autopilot flying south. And we had a couple guys intercept the airplane, and you're just basically looking inside the cockpit, and you see these bodies sort of slumped over. You know that they're asleep. There's nothing you can do about it. You're just sort of hoping they wake up. Otherwise, they're just going to run out of gas, and you're just sort of watching to see where the wreckage goes. And so, some of those sort of like more morbid or sad situations you're in part of every once in a while. Other times, you're just sort of out there ready to go, you know, rage until they tell you to stop.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. I know you do, like all military pilots, have to stay current in whatever jet you're flying, and maybe you might go weeks without having to intercept somebody or enforce a TFR or something. So how often are you actually flying when you're in the Air National Guard? Like how many days a week or a month or whatever?
Yeah, so it still jives with what the typical requirements are on the active duty. It's just you might be part-time pilot and you have to get them all knocked out in a very short amount of time. So, in the F-15, it changes via airframe and stuff like that. And the F-15, when I was there, um, if you were a young guy, so they would consider you inexperienced based on how many flight hours you had and some other criteria on there, you would need about 8 sorties a month. And so 8 sorties, a sortie could be just a normal takeoff to landing. It could also be you do a mission and you go hit a tanker and then you go do another mission that would count as 2 sorties. And so every once in a while you can sort of get a couple different sorties in one sort of mission from, takeoff to landing. But for the most part, one sortie equals one flight kind of thing to give you an idea of like how often you're doing it. If you're an experienced pilot like I was, then you typically need six. And so again, you're looking at in the best case scenario, getting all those knocked out in 3 days because we'd have two flying periods, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. And so you might be able to get, two sorties knocked out in a day, meaning that you still just need 3 days a month to get your flying done. And this is assuming that you're a part-time guy. So I was a full-time guy in the Guard for most of my career until I did the airline stuff. And so when you're a full-time guy, you're just like any other active duty pilot. Like you're available for 30 days a month to get your 6 or 8 sorties in. But if you're a part-time guy, you might have a civilian job and you show up for the squadron for only a handful of days a month. Like you're now the priority because we need to get you your flights when you're there. And so there's a whole laundry list of training squares that you need to check off throughout the month. And so we just look at, hey, when are you available? Nathan, you said you're available next Tuesday. Well, Nathan's the priority. He's going to fly next Tuesday, and he needs to do this and this for his training to get this knocked off. And so we would prioritize trying to get you your 6 or 8 sorties based on us doing that. So the schedulers in the squadron, especially in a guard or reserve squadron where you have a mix of full time and part time, like those guys are like doing calculus on the walls and beautiful mind stuff to figure out a schedule because there's so many different competing priorities. You have full-time guys that are always available. You have part-time guys that are only available on these days, but we're only flying on these days. And so they're mixing and matching like crazy, trying to get everyone their required training for the month. And it makes it challenging out there, but they figure out how to do it.
Yeah, that's nice. So we talked earlier a little bit about kind of your role as a younger lieutenant in the squadron. So what is it? What was it like to kind of progress and get more senior in the squadron? How did your role kind of evolve over time?
Yeah, so when you first show up to a squadron, you're a wingman. And so wingman basically means like you need to understand the tactics, you understand the playbook. When I say playbook, like think about a football playbook. When I call play if I'm a quarterback and I call play, everyone knows what their role is. And they are supposed to maybe cut this way or block this person or whatever the case is. That's the same thing with being a wingman. Like if I call play as a flight lead, I expect my wingman to do certain things and he knows what I expect out of him to go knock those things out. And so that's your role as a wingman is to do whatever the flight lead tells you to do and be ready to execute the tactics as you should as a wingman out there. So there's a lot to learn, but you're sort of like you're being led into everything you do. Like someone else is talking on the radio, someone else is doing all the mission planning, someone else is doing the debrief. You are just there to learn and to go help execute whatever he or she is leading you to do. As you progress throughout your career, you then get the opportunity to become a flight lead. And so that's a pretty big deal. And they give you that opportunity, and you go through a new training program called FLUG. So FLUG, so flight lead upgrade training. And that basically means that you go through your entire syllabus that you went through as a wingman of every mission set that you learned. But now instead of being the wingman, now you're the flight lead. And so what that means is that you need to come up with the briefing, you need to do all the coordination as far as like the airspace and the train assets that you're using. You need to then go execute the mission by leading the flight around and making sure that you're executing the proper tactics. And then at the end, you come back and you guys get in the debrief room, and now you're looking at all your tapes and making sure that you guys executed correctly. And if not, you're debriefing to that standard to make sure that you understand it correctly. And so um, it's hard to articulate how much work goes into that until you actually see it. But especially as a first time flight lead, trying to figure this out, there's just so much to learn. And imagine like any time that for school or anything like that, you've had to give a 60-minute presentation. Well, that's essentially what a briefing is it is from start to finish, you are the only person talking. And it is like, no kidding, hack. And when I say hack, I mean like you start your clock and then you are talking for 60 minutes. And you might have slides or you might write on like a whiteboard or something like that for the things that you're talking about in your mission. But it's very structured, but it's also like very rehearsed in the sense that you need to put a lot of work into like understanding how to give a good brief. So there's just hours and hours of work that goes into getting your briefs ready and practice presenting those. And then you go actually execute, and your flight might only be an hour long, maybe an hour and a half long on there because you burn gas so quickly. And then you might come back here, grab some lunch, and now you're going to sit there and debrief for hours. And then once you're done debriefing, then you hand the pens over, as they say, you hand the pens over to your instructor pilot because the instructor pilot who you're flying with has been grading you as a flight lead this entire time. And now he's going to debrief you on everything that he thought you did well or did poorly or need to improve or whatever. And then at the end of it, he's going to give you sort of a thumbs up or thumbs down, like, hey, did you pass or did you bust? And if you bust, you got to do it again. And if you pass, then you go start the whole process over again for whatever that next mission set is. And you just maybe have like 20 or 30 of those rides where you're just like constantly grinding to get that next brief ready and stuff like that. And so it's a grind, but you learn so much. Like the difference between going through Flug, being a wingman is a huge learning curve out there. But if Flug goes well, now you're a flight lead of one other airplane. So they call it a two-ship flight lead. And then if that goes well, they put you into in the Eagle community what they call four flug. So now you're learning all the tactics and stuff to to lead around four different airplanes. And if that goes well, then they might put you into a mission commander upgrade or MCUG, where now you might go to a place like Red Flag or one of these huge exercises, and now you might be in charge of leading everyone there. And so you might be, you're leading your four ship of Eagles, but you're also in charge of the entire escort package, which might be, eight F-22s and four F-35s and a bunch of F-16s and stuff like that. And so you might be in charge of all those people, and that's a mission commander. And then if all that goes well, then you can go become an IP or instructor pilot, and you go through the whole process all over again. But now you do it from an instructor perspective where you're instructing the entire time. So it's just held to a higher standard. And if all that goes well, then you can maybe go to weapons school or become a CFE, which is basically like a standardization evaluation guy. So you're giving people evals in the squadron and stuff like that as you get a little bit more senior on there. So everything I just talked about is a progression from maybe you start your flug a year to 3 years back at the squadron. And then depending on how well you do in that, that sort of sets your path for and sets your reputation within the community of how far are you going to go with this. And it could take anywhere from, 5 years to get through all those upgrades. You may only get through Flug, and that's it. You may go become an IP and be a fast burner and go to weapon school within 3 years on there. So it just sort of depends on your proficiency, what the squadron needs, and how well you're doing. But it's sort of a grind when you're going through it, but a lot of learning going on.
I didn't even know you could go to weapon school as a Air National Guard. I thought you had to be active duty, so that's interesting. But from what I understand, in the beginning of your career, you were full time, like you talked about. You were full time Air National Guard F-15 pilot. But later on, you did end up also being part time and going to the airlines, from what I understand. So how did that work out? Did you enjoy getting to kind of be part time in the military, fly fighter jets on the weekends, and also go fly at the airlines? How was that experience for you?
Yeah, so it worked out great. Fortunately, if you remember from the beginning of my story where I said I was able to go get a bunch of flight time as a civilian flight instructor before I joined the Air Force, that ended up being sort of a blessing in disguise for the airline perspective because I had already like 1,000 hours of flight time as a civilian. And then you sprinkle in a little bit of, fighter time from the Air Force, and that looks really good on an airline application. And so I was able to get picked up at the airlines like pretty early in my aviation career compared to my peers. And so it worked out really well. And so I was able to do the airline stuff, go part-time for a little bit, and then you have the option of coming back on full-time if you want. You can sort of, again, mix and match based on what you need, what the squadron needs, what the airline needs, all that kind of stuff. And so as far as the experience as being a part-time guy on there, like it's really cool. It's a nice sort of part-time job on there. Obviously, if you could choose to be a part-time fighter pilot, it's a pretty good gig. But it's a grind in the sense that if you go back to also like what I talked about for going through all your upgrades of being a flight lead and stuff like that, like you still need to do a lot of preparation going into any flight, even if you are an experienced person. So if I've been away from the squadron for 3 weeks doing airline stuff, and then I have, my 1 or 2 days in the squadron to try and get as much training done as I can for the month, I maybe haven't been there in 3 weeks. And my first day back, I have to lead a brief that starts at 7 a.m. Well, I haven't had any time to prep for that brief. I haven't been in the squadron. I haven't been able to get to the vault, like all the classified information and stuff like that to prepare for it. So that means that you might be showing up, 5 a.m. to try and get products ready for that 7 a.m. brief to then go fly and debrief and all that kind of stuff. And so it's one of these things where you're on the road doing the airline stuff, and then when you're not doing that, you're trying to like squeeze in as much time in the squadron as you can. And if the squadron gets deployed or goes on the road or goes to a training mission, like you're sort of expected to be able to give some availability to be part of that too. And so the ongoing joke that people have when you're doing the part-time fighter thing, plus airlines, plus have a family and stuff like that, is if the airline's pissed off at you, the squadron's pissed off at you, and your wife's pissed off at you, you're dividing your time among the three about right. And so it always feels like you're behind on something, right? Like you're never able to dedicate 100% to any one of those three things, but all three are important. And so um, it's a tough phase. I have a lot of respect for the people that can do it for a long period of time. But I would prefer to just be either full-time airlines or full-time military, which was more of my path that I took, I guess.
I for your time that you were at the airlines and also on the guard part time. Do you get any bragging rights when you walk into the flight deck? Like, hey, what'd you do over the weekend? Oh yeah, I just went a Mach 2 in an F-15. What'd you do? Do you get any of those bragging rights, or is it just no? You don't do that.
Uh, I think that the captains and old timers that you fly with as a young airline guy, like they might think it's sort of cool for a second, and then they quickly start talking about their second home that they're building and the money that they're making. So they can one up you pretty quickly on the lifestyle that they have versus a poor military pilot.
Yeah, I still think it's pretty cool if you get to fly. So yeah, I know we're running a little bit short here on time, so we'll start wrapping up here. But you're doing bogeydope.com now. So how'd that kind of come about? And what's the mission with that?
Yeah, so Bogey Dope started actually when I got hired at the airlines. So I was hired at the airlines now. I was sitting around hotel rooms and looking for something productive to do. And going back to when we first started about there's wasn't a whole lot of good information on these Garden Reserve pilot slots. And if you talk to anyone, whether it's the Navy pilots that you were talking to in previous episodes or active duty Air Force pilots or whatever, like if you talk to just about any of them, anyone would say like if they could do it again and had the opportunity, they'd probably go guard or reserve. It's just like the best kept secret in military aviation. You have control. You want to go full time. You want to go part time. You want to live in a certain location. You want to fly a certain type of airplane. You want to go to weapons school. You want to go to test pilot school. You want to deploy down range. You want to stay close to home. Like you get all the options that you want out there. And with the active duty, you just lose a lot of that control. And so once we figured out that this was in many ways the best possible path to take for most people to want to fly in the military, but the information was very scattered and not well illustrated. We just created Bogey Dope, and this was something that, like I said, was sort of worked on while sitting in hotel rooms doing airline stuff. Of hey, let's make an easy list of here are all the possible squadrons you could join. Here's an easy list of all the current job openings that they're posting because each of these squadrons will post their job openings sporadically throughout the year. And so now it makes it easier for applicants to be able to apply. We'll put a little bit of information out there as far as what's required to be competitive, and then just sort of grew from there. And so from there, people started to reach out to us, asking us for advice on how to be competitive, on what to do for interviews, on how to make their application packet competitive, and that kind of stuff. And so we started to develop tools around that to help people sort of stand out from the crowd. Now, most squadrons go through us to post their jobs. Most applicants come through us to try to optimize their application and interview prep. And then we spun off a second company called Mill Recruiter, which is like the software version of this application process. So instead of squadrons having to post in all these different locations, we just created the software version of where they can go and post all their jobs, which ties to Bogey Dope as well. And now applicants can digitally fill out one application. With that one application, they can apply to as many squadrons as they want. So you now can make one application. You can apply to all 165 different squadrons in the Guard and Reserve if that's something that you want to do out there, or you can only apply to one or two, whichever sort of flavor you want out there. So we've had our hands in both as far as like helping squadrons and applicants optimize their chances of getting selected, and then help develop that software to just try to make the whole process more efficient for squadrons and applicants to find the right candidates.
Nice. And from what I hear, it's been very successful and pretty helpful as well. So sounds like you guys are coming up with a great product. So yeah, I guess we'll just start wrapping up here. With along with Bogey Dope, and from what I hear, you're still flying a little bit. So yeah, what's next for Slap?
Good question. Good question. So right now, like Mill Recruiter that we just talked about, the software side of it. Right now we are in the talks of getting like a government contract with Air Force Reserve Command, Air National Guard, see if we can actually turn that into something bigger than what it currently is. Right now it's free for everyone out there. So if you want to apply, please go use it. It's free. It's free for squadrons, free for applicants. We're trying to get the government to hopefully pay for it so we can sustain it for a long period of time. So we're always looking for sort of ways of cracking the government contracting code, which as it turns out is way more complicated than we originally anticipated when we just want to solve a problem. Other than that, we're just here to help people. We've helped hundreds of people get into pilot slots, sort of like me and the road I took as a guard baby or reserve baby or even active duty now. And so it's just sort of fun to see people that are really passionate about this career, the same way that I was and am, go reach their dreams and be able to serve our country and do it in the way that they want.
Nice. All right. Well, that is all I have. Yeah, that's all I have as far as questions. Do you have anything else you think we should talk about before we wrap this up, or no?
No, man. Thanks for the time. This has been great to talk about it.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for taking the time. And yeah, have a great rest of your day.